Wonderful. We will have lots of time for questions at the end of each presentation today, but if there's something that's burning for you, you can use the hand up function on Zoom in the chat. We will take a screenshot today for reporting as well, and each of our speakers will present for about 25 minutes, which leaves plenty of time for questions at the end. So our topic today is public relations and interview skills for Landcarers. I'm not sure whether Ella has jumped in, Ella Mayset from Katanning Landcare, but she actually brought this topic up to WA Landcare Network, and it was a real light bulb moment for me, and I just knew this was something we had to develop, not only for WA Landcare members, but others in the landcare and environmental space across Australia. And the appetite for this subject is represented in the width and breadth of the people that are joining us today. As Ella eloquently said during a recent Landcare Checks-In session, the role of the landcarer and the things that they need to be across is so much broader now. And with the introduction of so many different communication platforms, and our appetite for visual content is so much stronger now, it's really important that we continue to develop and refine the ways in which we tell our stories. So some of the areas that we're going to cover today are the difference between paid, earned and owned media and how to leverage these for your organisation, interview skills and how to stay on message, and identifying the best person in your team to take on those tasks, managing when and if you find yourself in the hot seat, which has been happening a little bit lately in our space, and social media and communications in a changing landscape, and what's best for you and your Landcare group. And last but certainly not least, the power of storytelling and how to do that really effectively. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker. We've actually got two today, so two amazing speakers. We've got Muzza Munro, who's joining us from the land of the long white cloud today, and the lovely Rosie Rains is joining us from Sydney today as well. So first up, we're going to hear from Muzza, who has been working in the conservation space for over 2 decades. And today he's going to share his very personal journey and relationship with media and the challenges and opportunities that come from being thrown into the media spotlight. I've been lucky enough to work with Muzza in various capacities around wildlife fundraising campaigns and projects across the last 10 years. And his wisdom and experience in this area is something I'm really happy to be able to share with you all today. So I'm going to hand it over to Muzza to share his screen.
Thank you, Case. Thanks for the welcome. I'll just get this up and running. How's that looking? Can we see that?
Perfect.
That is fantastic. So, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I greet you, your ancestors and your descendants, completely and without exception. Ko ao te whenua, ko te whenua, ko ao. I am the land and the land is me. I just thought I'd kick it off with a little Māori proverb and welcome. So kia ora everyone from the beautiful Bay of Plenty in New Zealand. I live in a little place just out of Opotiki called Tirahonga, and I'm coming to you live from there today. So fantastic to be here. Thank you, Casey, for the welcome. Lovely to see so many faces from all across Australia. And yeah, I'll just take you on a little journey just about my story. As Casey said, I've been involved in the conservation, environmental and animal welfare space for the last 2 decades. And yeah, there's certainly a few stories to tell. I had to put together the presentation, and it reminded me of a lot of things that I've achieved and that I've been involved in. And we'll take a little bit of a step back in time to start off with, back to 1997. I was living in London, which is the rite of passage for a lot of Antipodean youngsters. I'd been over there for about 3 years, done a bit of traveling, but the place that I had saved to last was Africa. I wanted to get some travel experience under my belt before I went to the place that I'd only ever dreamed about, and read about, and that was Africa. And in 1997, I put on my backpack, left London, and headed out. That photo I took of the mountain gorillas, which for me was probably the most life-changing experience that I'd had to date. To spend an hour with these magnificent creatures up in their wild habitat was just mind-blowing. It wasn't long enough. I could have stayed there all day, but just watching their interactions and how human they were was just an incredible experience. I have been back to see them again. I think it's the first port of call if there's any trip to Africa, is definitely to go and see them. And an amazing conservation story. So their numbers are still increasing and steadily increasing through all the issues that they face, as well as other wildlife around the world. And it certainly inspired me, just being in their space, to make this part of my life and follow my passion and desire to do that. So after that trip to Africa, I moved to Sydney, and I spent the next couple of years there sort of doing odd jobs, and then I was selling windows and doors for James Hardie, and I enter paid media now. I saw an advertisement in the newspaper that was for a primates course at Auckland Zoo. And it was on Tuesday nights and for interest, and for 6 weeks, cost about $50. And so I signed up, thought I'd go along. A colleague of mine at the Windows and Doors Company came along on the first night as well. Halfway through the night, which was all about chimpanzees, he told me that he knew some people who worked at a chimpanzee orphanage in Africa, in Uganda. That's all I needed to hear. I said, can you email them the next day and see if they need any help, any volunteers? And that he did, and subsequently got an email back saying they needed a new landscaper to help with some landscaping around the new facilities that they created for the chimpanzees. All of a sudden, I was the world's best landscaper, never done it before in my life. But packed my bags and then headed off to Ngamba Island in Uganda, which is an island about 100 acres in size, in Lake Victoria in Uganda. They house about 52 orphaned chimps, all confiscated chimps from the bushmeat trade, the pet trade, or just ones that have been isolated, their families killed in the wild. So it was an incredible experience. And I went over there initially for 3 months to volunteer. And during that time, the amazing Jane Goodall turned up to film an IMAX movie. One of my heroes growing up, I'd read all her books. And an opportunity to spend 5 days with her as she filmed a story about her life for cinemas, and sit around the campfires and talk to her and really glean some amazing information from her, was only even more inspiring that I was on the right path and doing the right thing. So after 3 months, they needed a manager for the island, so I took up that role for the next 3 months until they had their new manager arriving. So that was an incredible experience, and they're doing great. The project itself was started by Westerners and had vets training local Ugandan vets. We were training admin staff. We were training chimpanzee carers with the intention that it would be handed over to the local community at the end. And they now run that very successfully themselves. It's been going about 25 years. And a lot of those chimps that were there when I was there are all grown up and still there. They can never be released back into the wild. So the Ngamba Island is their home. There's just no space, habitat, etc. We all know a lot of the issues around the world. But that was an amazing experience. After that, I headed back to Australia and then onwards to New Zealand. again, paid media jumped up, and I saw an advertisement in the newspaper, and this was for a captive wildlife management course through Unitec, similar to Polytech or TAFE over there, and involved some work experience at Auckland Zoo. So I studied there for that year, learning to be a zookeeper. But at the end of it, decided that I'd rather. I think I had a bigger voice than looking after a few animals in their enclosures. So I got involved in the marketing team, and I was product sales and development. So I looked after a lot of their experience products. So behind the scenes tours, junior keeper program, the safari nights, the Friends of the Zoo program, etc. So that was fantastic. And as far as the zoo goes, it's now council run. It wasn't at the time, but that gives you a big machine to work with as far as media goes. We had a marketing team. There was a TV show about the zoo. So a lot of the staff, or most of the staff, were all media trained. With a zoo, there's always good feel-good stories when there's births, deaths, and the beauty of Auckland Zoo was they were very transparent. So they had a fantastic relationship with all the media. If any new animals were arriving, the media always knew about their journey from start to finish, where they were coming from. Deaths were obviously highlighted as well, not so nice, but a lot of the community in Auckland and around New Zealand had a special relationship with a lot of these animals. So it was important, certainly, to keep them in the loop as much as everything was going on and everything that was happening. As far as paid media, there was always billboards, print advertising, and obviously the TV show. So they had a very good reach and a very good relationship with all the media. At this stage, social media wasn't around, so there wasn't a Facebook or a Twitter or Instagram or anything like that you could utilize. So I was very reliant on that print and television media. So I was there for about 4 years, and then after that, a job opportunity came up at Australia Zoo Wildlife Warriors. So I moved back to Oz in 2008. Funnily enough, this was the year that Facebook launched for the iPhone. A year later, the like button was introduced onto Facebook. And the year after that, 2010, Groups was launched. So we all know sort of how much that's developed and changed and is still changing and ever changing. Australia Zoo Wildlife Warriors, this was a fantastic opportunity. Obviously, after it was 2008, so Steve Irwin sadly had passed a couple of years before that, and that was a huge loss to not only his family and the zoo itself, but just to the world. That made worldwide news, and he was very inspiring for me, and one of the reasons that I was quite keen to get over there and help spread his conservation message and continue to spread his conservation message. The projects that were supported by Australia Zoo Wildlife Warriors included the Wildlife Hospital. At the time, had about 6,000 wildlife patients coming through the doors. That's increased. It's probably closer to about 9,000 these days. So a very vital hospital required in that area. We had cheetah conservation was part of the cause. One of the causes we supported: whale, elephant, tiger, and then the loss of Steve, obviously in 2006. Donations and things came flooding in. I think we all remember this image with little Steve with little Robert in his arms. So that's when media can go bad. So the relationship with media after that went viral became very different. So they tightened their belts, tightened the ship, and certainly had a media were kept at arm's length, but it was a very tight process with processes and procedures in place in order to deal with them. So, and only certain people were allowed at that stage to be spokespeople for the zoo and speak to them. With Wildlife Warriors, we had a patient of the week, and that was every week on a radio station. We would deliver that particular week's patient. So really, really important, just getting the message out there. And we also had lots of big events, etc. As far as the Irwins go, it was fantastic to have them on hand as celebrities. So they were spokespeople. We could utilize them to get the message out, and they were media darlings. You know, everybody wanted a piece of the Irwins, and they were a hot topic all the time. Still are to this day. So always in the media spotlight. Very media savvy. They obviously had TV shows, and the Crocodile Hunter series, I think, just speaks for itself. Is still going strong these days. And continuing with the celebrity note, we had a lot of celebrities come through the door, so they had a massive reach with, you know, huge audiences, huge followings. So if we needed a message to get out there, a lot of them would come, and people want to follow along what their favorite celebrities are doing. So if they're visiting the zoo, then people would put that on their radar as something to do as well. So I spent 4 years there, and then I just resigned, and then two of my colleagues at the time had just returned from Sumatra, brought back some photos of this little baby elephant that was a bit malnourished and very in need of help. And so I took it upon myself and two other friends who had left the zoo as well. We formed a team to help save little Bona, the elephant. So she was in Sumatra. I'd never been there. I was based in Bali at that stage and working a campaign, thinking we could raise some money, send it over, and that would help get the supplements that she needed. But we worked out pretty quickly that we would have to source those products and then go over to Indonesia ourselves and base ourselves there. So that photo on the left is when I first met her, so you can see how ill that she really is. She was not in a good state. We started first of all with a Facebook page, Please Help Bona, and just started spreading the word on there. We worked out she needed about $2,000 a month, Aussie dollars a month, in order to feed her with the supplements, etc., that she needed. So we put a call out and started receiving donations for her, which Wambaroo, I don't know if you're familiar, Wambaroo, the Australian company, made special 5 kg elephant packs of their Wambaroo mix for us, which was part of the formula that we'd been advised by vets that she should have. Then the elephant network around the world suddenly got engaged, and the word spread and messages went far and wide, and we were receiving all sorts of offers of support and advice and who we should talk to and everything from all over the world, which was just incredible. Her story just started to escalate, and people started to become aware of it, and we certainly had no problems raising the money that we needed to at that stage. I was going to go show you a video now. I'm a bit over time, Casey.
I'll just unmute myself there. If you want to keep pushing ahead, that's okay, Muzz. It's up to you.
Yep. Is everyone happy to? Okay, so I was just going to now play a video. It's a couple of minutes long. It's a little bit distressing in the first scene, but I promise you it does get better. So I will just kick over to that now. Bear with me a second.
Nyoba, tengok.
Time to get up. The time is 6:07. It's time to get up. The time is 6:07. It's time to get up. The time is 6.
Talk to me.
It's just a witness.
You want to talk to me? Oh, beautiful.
Wow.
Oh, it gets me every time.
Me too.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, amazing story. And from where she was to how she is now is pretty incredible.
So, Muzza, do you want to stop sharing your screen and we might have a couple of questions? I've certainly got a couple.
Sure.
Oh, you got some more slides there?
Yep. I'll just finish off with this. On the back of that, upon our return, there was just a media frenzy. So everybody wanted a piece of Bona and us, and we had newspaper articles printed. We had TV interviews. So we had, Phil Wilmington flew in by helicopter to King's Beach to come and interview us. We were on just about every channel. We were on the morning show and radio interviews, print TV, and that all culminated with a Australian story in 2013, about a year later, called The Chosen One. I'll put a link for that in the chat at the end of it. It enabled us to do a whole education. We got asked to go to schools all over the place and do talks about Sumatran elephants. And then Bona's home was under threat. We utilised all that network in order to do a change.org petition and get people to send in photos with them with signs. There were a lot of challenges, photos with elephants with chains, people riding them, trying to get white powder and kilos into Indonesia. And then obviously the government as well. They didn't take kindly, the Indonesian government, to the Australian story, because it portrayed palm oil fields being burnt and stuff, and or forests being burnt. So we had to be very careful around that, and it certainly changed our relationship. So lastly, there's Bona today. So that's her this year. So she's certainly come a long way.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you. That's that's sort of the highlights of those stories. And as far as media, a lot of that was earned and owned. We had an on-site photographer with us, so imagery was really important. We had to be a bit careful about what we put out there. But it was, having a videographer and a photographer at hand was fantastic. And then obviously having celebrities and people with big networks who could share the story.
Just for our audience, Muzza, earned media, can you just unpack that for us?
I think Rosie's going to go into that next, actually.
Oh, no worries at all. Thank you. I'll leave that.
Rosie will detail all of the three media types. That was really an opportunity to tell a story and see how they all sort of connected. So, so yes, thank you. Any other questions for now?
I just wanted to ask in terms of, we know about African animals because we see them in movies and they're sort of megafauna and they've got high profile, and you sort of managed to do this amazing thing for this one critically endangered animal. Do you ever have a sense of how that could translate into an Australian animal, or sort of an iconic Australian animal that would get the level of, impact that you were able to generate?
Blinky Bill or something. It's it's hard, it is hard. It's the cute and cuddly, it is the ones that typically get in. And baby elephants certainly tug on the heartstrings for a lot of people. If it was a baby crocodile or a baby snake or then it becomes even more difficult. But we had an opportunity to tell the story. And to be honest, that community in Sumatra didn't really care for elephants much. They had this herd of conservation elephants living in an area nearby, but a lot of the kids at the schools, those local schools, which were not far, had never seen an elephant. So what it's really done was sort of encourage them. We were visiting the schools, talking about them. We got them to do the activity books. We had it translated into Indonesian. And it really started the community getting together and then wanting to protect. And now they're fighting hard because there's mining companies looking to come into that area, and they want to destroy that forest. And if they destroy that forest, those elephants have to go. And that's pretty much what the community has attached themselves to. And that all started with Bona. So she's essentially an ambassador for her species. People said, why are you trying to save one elephant? And it was exactly that. But the Steve Irwin's old line was save one, save the species. And by saving her, but creating that big story around her, enabled so much more to happen, and certainly highlight the plight of what is happening with the Sumatran elephants. 2012, when that campaign started, they were listed as critically endangered. So there's approximately 2,500 estimated left in the wild. So they're in a lot of trouble.
Any other questions right now for Muzz? Ella?
Yeah, hi, Mary. Thank you for that. That was a really great story. I've got a couple of questions, I think. One was obviously that picture back at Australia Zoo when Steve Irwin was holding baby Robert and the crocodile. I remember that image from all. How do you manage when media goes bad or gets interpreted badly like that does? What do you need? Is it a keep quiet and let it go away? Is it get on the front foot and respond? How do you manage that situation? It probably ties into, you just made the comment then with the Australian story, how the Indonesian government weren't particularly pleased with some of the way that Indonesia was portrayed with that. And when, you're trying to get a conservation message across and there's resistance, especially from resistance in power, how do you manage that? So I suppose my question is around those two examples and dealing with it when it doesn't go the way you want it to go.
Ideally, it's not getting it to that point. So
ideally, but sometimes it happens.
If you can, but when it does, then you certainly need to be prepared for it. So it's about preparation, being knowing and then having the right people who can talk to the media, or have your press releases all prepared in order to because you know, a lot of times you'll be chasing your tail because it's something you weren't expecting. So it's really just anticipating that you know, all the different problems that may occur, or all the different scenarios that may occur, and being prepared enough for all of those, I think.
And not shying away from responding, like being on the front foot and saying, no, this is what it is or why, or is it just be quiet and it'll go away? No, be proactive is what your message is?
Yeah, yes, definitely be proactive. So that there's a reason that happened, particularly the Australia Zoo one. So they certainly came out after that and had to try and explain themselves. But you know, you're not going to win everyone over again. A lot of people did, and the media just didn't portray them that well. So, you know, with the Indonesian government, it was then we were very, very cautious, but that relationship changed. So the processes of us being able to go and visit Bona then became a lot more difficult. There was a lot more paperwork, and it became harder to actually get in there. But having the right people, particularly government officials that could talk to those people and just explain what we were doing. And then there was obviously an apology, but the Australian Story had actually because they were more concerned that it portrayed their particular province in that mind, and when the footage was actually from somewhere else in Sumatra, but it had stated that down below in each of the images, that, you know, imagery taken from such and such a place. So it's not an easy one, but certainly don't stand back and think it's going to go away. You can come out and talk to the issue, and then why your reasoning behind why your stance is so, or what occurred when it went sour.
Rosie's just written into the chat, in some cases it is good to stay quiet, but these are rare, and as Murray raised, are dependent on risk. And I think from memory, Rosie goes into that a little bit with her presentation, because we're getting more into that kind of technical side of the presentation. So I might let her expand on that later on. Is there any other pressing questions for Muzz at this time, or should we jump into Rosie's presentation? If everyone's okay with that. Thank you so much, Muzz. That was awesome. You've got such an incredible life story, and I appreciate you coming on to share that with us today. Our second speaker today is Rosie Rains, who some of you may know is the Communications and Campaigns Manager for the National Landcare Network, and has a history of successful strategic campaigning and PR for progressive organisations and figures, including the Honourable Emma Hurst MLC and Landcare Australia. She is skilled at shaping public opinion through a combination of social media, earned media, fundraising, relationship building and grassroots organising. So I'm going to hand the floor over to Rosie.
Thanks, Casey. That's a very lovely introduction, and kind of embarrassing, to be honest, to have that all read out about you. It's lovely to meet everyone. So as Casey said, I'm the Communications and Campaigns Manager at the National Landcare Network, and I'm also the Communications and PR Manager at Ruminati, which is an agricultural emissions calculator startup. So I do both, I guess, progressive NGO media and also, I guess, commercial or startup media at the same time. So I'll just share my screen and just make sure that you can all see my slides. Is that working for everyone? Fantastic. All right, give me just a moment, then I'll just make sure that I'm not distracted by seeing you all. So look, I'll just jump straight into it, because I know that we sort of want to get through this as soon as possible. So I'm going to build on what Murray has said, which is honestly one of the best presentations I've ever seen, and is a fantastic example of how storytelling is done really well. That was such an engaging presentation. But before you, I guess, approach media like Murray, there are a few things that you need to consider if you have a story. So we'll go through this first, and then we'll go through your options, and then we'll jump into dealing with difficult interviews, which I know there's been a few questions about already. So the first thing that you need to consider with any story that you might have is what you're actually trying to achieve, because for every story, there's a bit of a different goal about what you're sharing. So for a Landcare group, that might be simply increasing attendance to an event or increasing your membership. It might also be something to do with inspiring community action, similar to what Murray's done. So I know that some Landcare groups are very involved in this. We definitely have some in Queensland that are really involved in campaigning against the development in Toondah Harbour, which is in a Ramsar wetland. But that might be also another example of a media story that you want to put out. The other is one that happens quite often in Landcare, which is showcasing a successful project or event. So that's either to get people to the event or to do it after the event or project has occurred. And in a hot tip, this can also supplement your funding grants if you're getting it in front of the right people. So if you put a grant in and then you also can't include in the grant the success of a previous project, getting a media story out the week your grant application goes in is a really good idea. So the next thing you need to consider after your goal is also who your audience is. So I've just touched on that. In some cases, that might be just key decision makers, MPs or government, but it also might be potential volunteers, certain local community members and things like that. So you need to really think about who is going to read it and where they are going to read it. Then you need to think about where your story is going to get the most impact. Now, obviously, as Murray said, he was on Australian Story. This is obviously a very impactful program that's watched by a lot of people. But some stories aren't appropriate for Australian Story, and it's also not reaching out to maybe the people that you want to come along to either your event or celebrate your project. So think about where your audience is looking at things, where they're going to most engage. So is that, say, on social media instead of in earned media, which is print and online radio or TV, which we'll go into in a minute. Or is it that they're more likely to engage with what you want them to do by seeing you on TV or listening to the radio, say on a drive program? Is it more likely that you want them to do something before they come home? You want to be on a drive program. And so then it's also to do with your goals, whether they are going to take action or whether you're, say, sharing a story. So is this the best medium for getting your story out? The next thing you need to consider, which is something that Ella brought up, is actually how sensitive your story is. So are there going to be risks involved with the story that you're putting out? Is this going to be contentious to some people? And do you think you're going to get pushback? Now, that shouldn't ever stop you from putting out a story if it's important to you. But you do need to consider the risks involved first. And a really great way to do that is to identify them beforehand, or as many as you can, and then have a risk mitigation strategy. So for Landcare groups in WA, for example, that might be really good to let the WA Landcare network know that you're putting out a story and that you've identified certain risks. So if something does go wrong or they need to step in, they're not surprised by a story in the media that might have some negative pushback. And they've also got a network of people on hand to support you to make it through that media crisis. There's also different ways that you can control media stories. Now, I'll go into that again in just a moment about how much control you have over different channels. But even when there isn't as much control, there are some ways of trying to increase the amount of control you have, even in a difficult situation. The final thing to think about is what your budget is. So in some cases, many cases, there will be no budget. So you can't do, say, paid media, which are your advertising options, advertorials, billboards, things like that, or social media boosting. So then it limits your options that you can choose as an avenue to share your story that you're looking for. So let's go into what those media options are. Give me just a moment. So these are your media options here. There are three types that we've really broken them down into. There's paid media, advertising. So that is in terms of online advertising, print advertising, radio advertising is another option, or things like Murray has described, billboards and options like that. Obviously, for this, there is a cost involved. So you have to obviously pay to get yourself, unless you have really good connections with people, say at your local paper, you have to pay to get those stories in there. But flip side of that is the control over what is said in those articles is very, very high because you're writing them yourself. So for example, you can write an advertorial piece, which is a long form article similar to a news story for outlets like The Land or Queensland Country Life. They will cost you a bit of money, but you are guaranteed to get your story in there, and you are guaranteed to get your story word for word of what you have written in fundamentally semi-targeted, because you're choosing what outlet is putting that out for you way. It's not exactly every single person you may want to see the story, but that's how you can do it in a semi-targeted way with money. And I would say that you would get medium impact for each story on that, mainly because people unfortunately have to know it's an ad. Regardless of if you write an advertorial and it is a long form story piece, it will say at the bottom that it is an ad. So sometimes people are less likely to take that seriously, because if someone else is writing it about you, it shows essentially that they value that story more. So it's not just you valuing your own story. So that takes us then onto earned media. So there are 3 types of earned media, and I know Jack asked the question previously about what earned media is. That's media that you have to put work into, essentially, to getting. It is free in the sense that you're not paying for it, but you're paying for it with your time. So those media options include print or online stories. Often those come together in tandem. So an outlet will put out a printed story and on their online pages, and sometimes they might also supplement that with social media on their pages as well. On radio, which can be via radio grabs, live radio interview, or a pre-recorded radio interview, and on TV. So as I said, the cost for that is usually 0, but your control over what comes out in these stories, as Murray's actually described quite well, is quite low. Someone else is writing this story about you, and I'll go into ways that you can raise control. One of these is by reviewing, but it is really rare that they will let you review a story, and especially for a TV or a live radio interview, you're not going to get to review that. If you make a mistake on camera, it is up there and you'll have to deal with it later. But the thing with earned media is that, as Murray has also described, it is very high impact. That is where people consume a lot of their media, as well as social media now. You can target it to get it in front of the right eyes at the right time. And as I said before, many people view it, compared to an advertorial, as if an outlet is writing about you, they value your story, and so they, as a reader or a viewer, should value it as well. So the final type of media that you have the option to do is owned media. So this is your social media, so your Facebook, your Instagram, your LinkedIn, your TikTok, and also then direct media. So that's emails that you send out. Now, you'll notice here that I've said that while social media is free, direct media you can actually pay for. This is because you can pay for a mail distribution service. Some of you may likely have heard of these. These are things like MailChimp. But generally, I would recommend that if you don't have over like 100 subscribers, you probably don't need to pay for your mail service. The thing to keep in mind with owned media, though, compared to, say, earned or paid media, is while in earned and paid media, you're talking to, I guess, potential volunteers or potential members or the public or decision makers. For owned media, you're really only speaking to people that know you in your network. So that you're essentially speaking to your own bubble. Now, obviously, there's value in this because you want to celebrate your successes with your own members, your volunteers and community. But it means that for stories that you say think have bigger impact or want to have bigger impact, you don't generally launch them or only promote them on social media. Now, there are exceptions to this. You used to be able to do this on Twitter, now known as X, but it is becoming rarer and rarer to do so. And you'll notice as well at the bottom with control, I have said that there is a medium control on social media. This is because of commenting and trolling on social media. Now, you may have, and we'll go into this in a minute, but you may have control over what you post, but you do not have control over what people post underneath it and where they share it to. So just something to keep in mind, that anything you publish really on social media and fundamentally even in email can be misconstrued and shared to people. So just always be very careful about what you're saying before you go public with anything. So if you've got your media story, you've got your own media story, you're going to speak to media, what do you do before that's going to happen? Well, there are a few things that you need to go through first. The first is to work out who, before I pop into that, I'll just say that we're not going into it in this presentation, but there are a few ways to reach out to media that we could go into maybe in a different one. Those are through a media release, a media alert, which is used to usually describe events. It has a who, what, when, where, why. A media statement, which is often used after a media story comes out and that you're responding to it, or a direct pitch where you're either just emailing a journalist directly or calling them on the phone. Now, again, we won't go into this in this presentation, but if you are looking to look up journalists in your area, often you can just do this online. If you go into the website of the publication, scroll right down to the bottom and press contact, often it will list either their news desk or the journalists that are working there. So it's relatively easy to do. It's just a little bit hidden. But for example, if you've done that and you're deciding now, you've got your journalist ready, you're going to make a pitch to them, what do you think about beforehand? The first thing is who your spokesperson is. And I would recommend that you always think about your spokesperson in terms of a particular story. So often immediately when you think of a spokesperson, you think of, say, your group leader or the CEO of an organization, but this might not always be the right person. Sometimes it's the person that's most involved in the project, or if it's a risky story, it's actually the person that has the most media experience or confidence. Now, that may be the CEO if they've had media training, but it may not. So it's always important just to think about what the risks are involved when you're going out to media with the story and who you think the person that would best portray what's happening in your story is. And I would recommend for local projects, generally media want to speak to someone on the ground that's been involved in the project. They want a local story. So if you've been involved, you're the spokesperson. The second thing, though, to think about is if your spokesperson is going to be available. When you're doing a media pitch, you always need to put some contact details down the bottom, whether that's of you or your spokesperson. And your spokesperson needs to be available on the day that you are pitching to media. I cannot stress enough how upsetting it is when you pitch a story and the journalist calls back. They're really excited to do the story. They're really keen on your Landcare project. They call back, they say, yep, I want to speak to this person. You call them and they say, I'm actually not available, but I can speak to you about that in 2 weeks. Unfortunately, it's not a story in 2 weeks, and the journalist is going to lose interest very quickly unless you can find a replacement spokesperson. So before you pitch, always make sure that you have a spokesperson, preferably also a backup spokesperson, and that they're both available to speak. The last thing to think about, and we'll go into, this is leading into our maximizing control over your stories, is how you're speaking to these journalists, how you are providing them with this information. So for example, if you're speaking to them over the phone, often journalists can unfortunately misquote you for a print article. And this isn't because they don't like you or they want to do you dirty or something like that. It's often just because they're time poor. A lot of journalists have actually lost their jobs over the last 5 or so years. News desks are a lot smaller and they just don't have as much time to spend on each story. So they're taking notes and that's all you're going to get. The other thing is obviously I've talked about as well live interviews, whether that's TV or radio. There's really no room for error there. So unless you're incredibly confident or your spokesperson is incredibly confident, I would not recommend them when you're starting out with engaging with media. But how do you maximize control, especially in situations where you feel a bit put on the spot or you feel that your story is a little bit risky? Well, when you're pitching to a journalist, instead of talking to them over the phone, you can tell a little white lie. You can say something like, oh, look, unfortunately, I'm really busy at the moment. Can you let me know your deadline for the story? And I'll get back to you by email. And instead of talking to them on the phone about what is going on with the project or what the quotes are, the journalists will know the questions they're going to ask you. They can email them through to you and you can write them back. When you have written them down, they're copying and pasting them out of that email. And I know this because sometimes I've seen in media articles, "Cheers, Rosie," written as a copy paste out in an article. But it means that you're never going to have your quotes misconstrued. The other way is, obviously, as I mentioned before, is asking to review. Now, this is really rare that they will let you do this, but there is no harm in asking. And as we discussed before, if it's a risky or sensitive story, have a response plan ready. Make sure you've notified, if you're a Landcare group in WA, notified WA Landcare Network. Make sure that you have identified potential risks, because as Mari said, there could always be more. And the last thing is always to be aware of your media confidence level. I cannot stress enough the stress it will put you under if you have become overconfident, and the stress it will put over the people around you. It is very easy to ask a journalist if they offer you a live interview and you don't want to do one, and you say, look, can I do it pre-recorded, which is an interview that they record, and you can make mistakes and they will cut those bits out, or you can half do a sentence and you can say, oh, look, sorry, I've said the wrong thing, and they can go back and they will cut it out so it sounds nice and smooth. There is no harm in asking for something like that. The issue is when people think that they can do it, or are passed on an interview to do it, and it's really shattering for a group. An example of this is when, I'm not going to name the organisation, but a pre-recorded interview was organised for a very high-profile national project. The day came, it got handed around because the spokesperson wasn't there. And it got pushed back later and later to the point where it became a live interview. Now, the person that was then put up with the spokesperson, as the spokesperson wasn't confident and had to go on and do that interview, that live interview, then became a callback interview where people were calling in from around Australia, asking them questions that they weren't prepared for. And unfortunately, out of that interview, the person who was the spokesperson came away feeling very distressed. The group came away not looking very good, and the public or the audience also came away not having very much confidence in the project. And it caused a lot of problems that didn't need to be there initially. So just make sure that you're aware of your media confidence, and never be afraid to ask for something else from a journalist to make yourself feel more comfortable. But what happens if you are in the hot seat? There are a few tactics that you can do if you find yourself in one of those live interviews, especially on TV or radio, and they're asking you some questions that you don't like. Well, the first thing is to stay focused on your key messages. So generally in any pitch, there'll be a list of between 3 and 5 things that you definitely want to say. Things like who your project is involving, what it's about, when and where. Have them printed in front of you if you can, or at least have your media release or media pitch printed in front of you so you can refer to what you've provided the journalist with and make sure that you're staying on message. If you are asked a difficult question though, there are some ways that you can deal with it. The first way though is to definitely acknowledge the question. So don't pretend that you didn't hear it, because the journalist will know. Acknowledge the question because it helps you stall for time as well. So I've got a few examples of how you can do that up on the slide. And then you can bridge, which is kind of changing the subject and changing it back to what you were originally trying to talk about. So an example for here is that your group, in its example, is restoring habitat for wombats in the Nullarbor. And then you're asked about the culling of wombats in South Australia. What do you say to that? Because as a Landcare group, you're not in South Australia. You know that it's already a divisive issue in South Australia, and you don't want to get involved in that argument. So an example of responding to this is you can say something like, I can understand why you've asked that, but what we're really focused on is protecting wombats on our patch, because for a long time we feared that in WA, wombat populations have gone extinct. So you're still acknowledging the question, but you're changing it back to what you originally wanted to talk about, and also giving some additional information about why the project that you're doing is important to your area. Now, that might, in some cases, in a semi-difficult interview, that might end that line of questioning right there. But unfortunately, in some cases, it may not. If they ask again, you can bridge again. You can just keep doing it. So, for example, you can, if they ask you the same question, they say, look, we really want you to comment on this wombat culling in South Australia. You can respond by saying, well, I can't comment on wombat culling in South Australia. So be very clear. What I can say is that we're really excited to have seen over 100 volunteers come together to restore wombat habitat in the Nullarbor. So make it very clear to them that you are not going to answer that question, but politely. If they ask the same question again, which I have seen happen multiple times, because obviously journalists get on there, they have a set of questions that they're trying to get an answer for you out of. You can be really clear with them. Say, look, I'm not here to talk about this. You've asked me this numerous times. I am here to talk about my project. Another tactic they may use instead of asking you that question for a third time, especially on radio interviews, is just to not respond, because there is a human inclination to try and fill silence. But don't fall for this trick, is all I'll say. If you've said your piece and you don't need to say anymore, don't say anymore, because it reflects more on them than it does on you. The other thing that I would say is that if you are in a difficult interview and a journalist is asking questions or making comments and it's just not factually correct, do not feel afraid to correct them. Really, pop culture reference to this is That's Not Correct, Ellen, which was on the Ellen show. Feel free to do it. It's not shameful. It's hard to do and it can feel a bit scary, but you're there as the expert and you need to portray yourself as the expert. If they're incorrect, let them know. The other thing though, in the opposite way, is to make sure that you never make something up. So if you don't know the answer to a question, because this can make an interview go south really quickly, just say that you'll get back to them, and that's absolutely fine. Now, I'll just ask Casey, because I can see that we're going a bit over time. Did you want me to jump into doing social media really quickly, or shall we stop here and have a discussion?
I think we've got some time to go into social media. Yeah.
Cool. No problems. Well, I'll move on and I'll try and go through it very quickly because the NLN has some social media worksheets that we've actually done up that Casey will circulate afterwards. So I'll just do a top line explanation and then she can send those through and you can go do a bit more of a deep dive, because I don't want to keep people longer than they have to. So obviously another form of media outside of earned media that we've just talked about is social media. So there are a few different platforms that you can work on. They're listed here on the screen. Many Landcare groups generally operate on Facebook, some on Instagram, but you can also get on LinkedIn, Twitter, or formerly Twitter, now X, and TikTok, which some groups are really into and others are just a no-go zone. And what I would say is don't be afraid of TikTok, because it's really great for sharing how-tos and storytelling and slice of life content about Landcare that can really get young people involved and increase the membership of young people in your group. What I would say is that these are just a few of the social media platforms available to you. If you're looking at getting into social media, don't ever feel the need to use all of these channels. It's actually way better and way more impactful to do one or two channels better than doing all channels in a kind of mediocre way, especially if you're a Landcarer and you're time poor. Just do Facebook really well. Just be really engaged on Facebook and make sure you share everything there, or Instagram, either one. So what makes a really good social media post, or how do you engage people on social media? Well, there are three parts to it. The first part of this, oops, give me just a second. I've had something come up on my screen that's a bit in the way. So sorry, is to create really engaging content. So social media content is generally text or caption and a visual, whether that's a static image, a carousel, or a video. So really the things that you need to think about are framing what you're posting on social media. So outside of what we discussed before with the story, there are generally three good ways to think about a social media post or how you're going to frame it. Are you trying to educate people or share some information about that they might be interested in about what you're doing? Inspire people to get involved, find out more about Landcare? Or are you inviting them along to an event? Now, it can be a mix, but generally most posts from Landcare groups would fall into these kind of three categories. So then when you think about your content as well, you want to make it really clear once you've decided on your category and sort of the topic you're writing about. Make it really clear. Your social media post, no one generally looks at a social media post on average for more than 3 seconds. So you've got 3 seconds to get someone's attention. So it needs to be really simple, really clear, focused on one topic. And if you're including links or calls to action, so to get people to do a particular action, focus only on one. So only have one link or one question, and never really combine the two, because people have really limited attention spans. So that's mainly for your caption, which is the foundation of your post, thinking about what content goes in there. But then you come to your kind of your visual content, so your image or your video. So if you're creating an image to go with that, and that might just be a shot of your Landcare group or some work that you've been doing, make sure that it's in line with your story. So for example, don't do a post about some birds that you've been doing their habitat for them, and then post a picture of a plant. Like, it seems common knowledge, but it just should be reminded. Make sure that with your image as well, that it's really visually clear. So especially with platforms like Instagram, which are image driven, you need to have a really clear, well-lit image, because that's when people are going to look at your post and click on your post and engage with it. So if you've got faces, make sure they're well lit, facing towards the camera, and not a line of bums. And also, if someone or a particular person is the focus of your story, make sure it's a photo of them and not a photo of a whole group, so people know that it's a I guess a summary of what one particular person is doing. If you can, when you're creating those images, you can superimpose a small version of your logo on there so when people share it, they know it comes from you. Now, you can do this in programs like Canva, but it's not essential. And the other thing to keep in mind is, if you decide to superimpose a logo and then also some text, the less text on an image is better. The algorithm, which is the programming in the back end that essentially decides what is shown in people's news feeds on each different platform, doesn't favor images with too much text on them. So just make sure that your image is mostly photo with just a bit of text if you are including it. The other thing, the other visual way that you can engage on social media is through video. Now, I mentioned this to people, and most people balk at the way of doing video. Video isn't actually that scary. Social media platforms do reward video, and in fact, on those platforms, it's way better to do candid video and not really high-profile videography. And I'm talking about platforms, by the way, like Facebook and Instagram, and not YouTube, which has those longer form, more high-quality videos. So social media does reward videos. The algorithm that I mentioned before loves it when people make a video. It is more likely to be shared in people's news feeds. And it's really great for individual story sharing stories about your Landcare group, or educational videos as well do really well on social media. So as I mentioned, many platforms reward that video, but you need to keep in mind, unfortunately, that some platforms, Instagram especially, will boost videos more if you take the video. So if you're literally walking around with your phone taking the video and then edit it in that actual app, it is far more likely to be shared. Some of those editing tools can be a bit difficult, but like I said, sometimes you don't really need to edit it very much and only cut down at the front and the end. And it's a very candid video, and people love to see content like that. The other thing, though, that I would say is that unlike videos that might be professionally created for YouTube, social media videos need to be really short. Generally, it shouldn't be more than 30 seconds. And if you have created a longer one, I would always recommend that you cut it down to a preview and put it on social media, and then link it to the longer form version on somewhere like YouTube. So just for an example of a Landcare group actually that does social media really well, which if you're looking to get into doing more social media content, I'd recommend you have a look at, is Brunswick Valley Landcare. So they create both videos and photo image content. It's literally all taken on their phones. They do a fantastic job as well of also creating video content through static photos. They put all their photos together in a slideshow that they create on Instagram, and it gets a lot of engagement and comments. So I put them up there. I did ask if I could use them as an example. So if you'd like to go and check out their page, I'd highly recommend it for some inspiration. So the last thing I'll go into just quickly before we finish is something that I mentioned earlier about control over the media that you're putting out, and that is dealing with social media comments. So social media comments work both ways, comments as well as likes. And I would recommend, actually, if you're liking your own post or encouraging people to, you should love it instead, because there is a weird thing with the algorithm where it thinks that if you choose any of those other options and not just the thumbs up, that it's boosted a bit more. But comments and those likes make the algorithm share your post more, especially if they happen in the first few minutes. So if you're in a Landcare group and you tell people, right, I'm putting this post up right now, can you guys all hop on Facebook and like it? It will do a lot better engagement-wise, because the algorithm, as I've mentioned, will think that more people are interested in your post and will share it more widely than if you kind of put it up and just turn the app off and walk away. That's not to say your post won't do well, but it will do better if it's engaged with really quickly. So with these comments, obviously we want to reward positive comments or even neutral comments on the platform by responding to them. So I've given a relatively recent example here. It's not that recent. You can see it's from 2 to 3 weeks ago. But engaging with your audience and getting them to comment back boosts the post even more. And it also shows them that you are there to build a community. You're not just a broadcaster. You're actually interested in what your audience has to say. But not all comments are positive or neutral. Some of them can be quite negative. So the first thing I would say to that is if you do get a negative comment on your social media, please resist the urge to argue with someone. We all want to do it, especially if they're horribly, horribly wrong, especially if it's in a very, very offensive way. But just don't do it. No one wins. Usually if that person is commenting that kind of thing on public social media, their opinion is formed, they're not going to change. They may even be doing it just to get a rise out of you. So there are a few ways that you can deal with that. One is to either hide the comment. So you can do this on Facebook where you can hide it instead of delete it. So what happens then is the person who's commented, they think that their comment is still there and their friends think that their comment is still there, but everyone else can't see it unless they try and really go and click through to try and find it. Now, this can be useful because sometimes if you delete comments, people will come back and they'll say, why did you delete my comment? And then they will get their friends involved, especially if, say, it's racially charged, and they will all start commenting on your post, which can lead to a bit of a crisis. But sometimes if it's just someone who is uninformed making a rude comment, hiding it is generally fine. Deleting it is fine, but hiding it kind of placates the people that are going to go in there and come back and get angry if you delete their comment. The other thing to think about is that hiding comments isn't available on every platform. You can't do that on Instagram, and also deleting comments isn't available on every platform. So sometimes you also can't delete comments on Twitter. So just to keep that in mind before you post something that's risky. The other thing that you can do is say that you can turn the comments off. If you've identified a risk beforehand, you can turn the comments off. But if you do this, I would recommend that you acknowledge it first in your post so that people don't come on and comment on your other posts asking you why you've turned comments off. So you'll see other organizations do this by saying things, especially around the recent referendum, that our comments on this post have been turned off to limit hate speech. So just be really honest about the fact that you turn comments off and why you've done that. And don't be afraid to block repeat offenders. So if there's someone coming on, you've deleted their comments, they're still being really awful, they're, say, for example, attacking other people that are commenting on your posts, don't be afraid to block them. It's absolutely fine to block that person because, as you can see at the bottom of the slide, you're responsible for the comments and safety legally, like quite literally legally responsible for the comments and safety of people visiting your page. So just be vigilant about what people are posting and make sure that with any online social media platform that you have, you are fostering a safe community that encourages people to become that online community as opposed to scares them off or makes them feel unsafe. So I've sort of rushed through that, but that's the end. I'm so sorry that we've gone over time. And this is a photo of the lovely Landcare Network, including WA Landcare Network. So thank you for listening to me, and I will turn that off and we can have a chat.
It was amazing, Rosie. So many fantastic practical examples of ways in which we can safely engage with media. Does anyone have any questions for Rosie?
I'd like to jump in, Rosie, and just say to Caroline and Case to get their interpreted dance ready for TikTok, because we've talked about TikTok and it's just hard to find, like, how do you know what's the good content? Is TikTok going to work with the little fat furry babies still, or can it be a person, or what do you think we could use?
So it's a really interesting question, and it often comes up in new platforms like TikTok, where people see it, for example, as like it's teenagers dancing. But what you're seeing there is not the kind of people that you're not trying to engage with teenagers dancing. So that's not even your audience on that platform. So the first thing I would say, because every organization is different, is to get on the platform. So for example, if that for you guys is TikTok, and actually look up what kind of content is being made by the people that you would be interested in hearing from, and replicate that content. So for Landcarers, often that's going to be how-to videos, really quick ones saying like, look, if you're doing this kind of propagation, this is how you do it. Introducing your Landcare group. Some furry animals often do really well. Sometimes even just to camera Landcarers talking about their own experience doing Landcare and inspiring others to get involved as well can work really well. But don't be everyone seems to be really afraid of TikTok. Don't be afraid of TikTok. It's not just teenagers dancing, and it is not just cat videos. You just actually have to get on the platform and have a look about the content that you would be interested in, your audience would be interested in.
I think a perfect example of how we could do a migration in Landcare is our AGMs and end of year gatherings that are coming up. So instead of taking those usual group photos, is to actually have someone take video and cut that into a reel, because it's going to be the same content, but it's being shown in a really engaging way, and it's going to get more views than if you've just got your standard photos. So that's something that I'm going to take away from this conversation today, Rosie, is to give that a go at our end of year gathering in a few weeks at the Wetland Centre in Coburn, and see and give it a whirl and see if it makes a difference.
Yeah, definitely. And look, every platform, their different content is appropriate for different platforms. So for example, you're generally not going to post kind of fun content on LinkedIn. But in some cases with that video that you take as well, it can be used across platforms. So you often see TikToks become Instagram Reels, become Facebook Reels, because those are relatively similar community building platforms. And so don't feel like you're just taking that video and it's only going to be used on one platform and that's it. If you do have different channels, you can use them over different channels, because you will have a slightly different audience on each of those channels. Just make sure it's appropriate for that channel, because if you are, doing a bit of a dance at the end of your AGM, or there are people getting a bit loose, you maybe don't want to post that on LinkedIn.
I think that's more than unlikely, Rosie. quite a sedate lot at our gatherings, and we'll probably keep that trend going. But look, I just have to say, what you've given me today, just speaking for myself, between that fantastic story from Murray, which I'll have another little weep about later, because it's just such a beautiful thing to see that elephant restored to health. And I keep thinking about, how we might look at some iconic Australian animals to do it. But you've given me a sense of confidence about interacting with the media. And I think that's often our biggest barrier, is being afraid. I'm going to be misquoted. What do I do? I'm going to get trapped into saying something I don't want to say. I'll post something and there's no way of taking it down. And what I've heard today is like, that's all false, So it's really wonderful stuff. Thank you so much.
That's okay. And look, I am very, I have two colleagues, or maybe just one now on this call. No, definitely two. And they will both tell you that I'm very risk averse. But yeah, look, it isn't scary to engage in media. Generally, most journalists, unless they have a very strange personal vendetta against you, are not out to get you. They want a good story, is all they want. And so you just need to, often want to sensationalize something, and you just need to be aware of that. And that's it. That's really all it is. They are happy for you to call them on the phone. They are happy for you to say, look, I'm going to do this in writing and not over the phone, as long as you get it to them on time. So it's absolutely fine to engage with media. It seems scary, but your confidence builds over time, and generally it's quite fun, and sometimes can even be enjoyable. Sometimes.
Well, do you have a question there?
Yes, I was just wondering, thanks, Rosie. I was wondering about the value of developing a relationship with a particular reporter or reporters.
Very valuable, especially on a local scale. Developing a relationship with a local reporter that will come out and report on your activities or can run ongoing stories is really important. Honestly, one of the most impactful things I've ever seen on a local level is Roy's Roundup, which is run by Roy Butler, who is in New South Wales Parliament. He has an incredible media advisor who made a relationship with him with his local paper in his electorate. And every month he writes, I think maybe every week now, but every month he used to write a column that was in there every week. So not only did he have a great relationship with the journalist in a paper, but he was actually able to write it himself. So that control level was really high. But you only get that from reaching out to begin with and building those relationships and showing that those journalists and that outlet that you have good stories to tell, which Landcare always does. I just feel that often people are very shy about starting off that conversation or trying to toot their own horn a bit. Let the journalist toot the horn for you. Just make sure that you give them the information and they will do all the tooting that you need.
Can I just pipe up there and say that certainly with the Bona campaign, we formed a really good relationship with our local. We're all Sunshine Coast locals, so the Sunshine Coast Daily, a reporter there jumped on the story, but we'd approached lots of media outlets right across the country and even internationally about the story. But she took it up and followed through. So there was a regular story coming out about Bona's progress as things went along, what was happening. And even after the Bona story, there were a couple more baby elephants that we attempted to rescue and save as well. Sadly, didn't make it, but followed through with those stories as well. So that relationship was vital for us. And on the back of those stories, other media outlets wanted, they obviously keep an eye on things. So they jumped on board as well. So it was a really important relationship.
I think last week in the ESG forum as well, Keith Bradbury touched on how important establishing those relationships are with local media. So, yeah, absolutely vital to opening up opportunities to tell your story on a regular basis in your hometown.
Can I have a last question, Rosie? Do you think Facebook is diminishing in its capacity to engage a broad demographic? Like, is it getting very, very narrow?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. Facebook, the age of people that engage on Facebook is quite high. I would say that no one under 20 engages in Facebook, and I'm 32, and the only people that I know that engage in Facebook are parents or mum, like young, my age mothers. The reason for this is, I think that there are new platforms that are coming out, and different demographics engage in different platforms. They communicate in different ways. So Facebook still works really well for, dare I say it, an older generation, but maybe not as well for younger people. So this is where it comes into you deciding who your audience is that you want to engage with. Is it that you want to engage with older people because they may be retired and they may have more time on their hands and they're more likely to engage in Landcare? Or is it that you want to engage with younger people because you want that younger generation coming through? Like I said before, when you're considering things like this about where to put your energy, because being a social media manager is a full-time job, and none of us have time to be a full-time social media manager, unless there are some full-time social media managers on here, in which case, good for you. You're very lucky that is your only job. But think about what audience you want and direct your attention there. It is far better to identify your goals and what your audience is first, than kind of spread yourself really thin, like I said before, and get on every social media platform and kind of give it what you can, but actually not much energy. The way that you get engagement is to be engaged. And so that might just be saying like, look, we're going to engage on Facebook. We're going to test it for a year. We're aiming for these people. We've already got our audiences on here. So many Landcare groups, to be fair, have Facebook groups that already exist. And people that, if you then started saying like, no, we're only going to post on TikTok or we're only going to post on Instagram, may then stop engaging with you altogether, because that's not the platform that they use. So just, I would say, weigh up your options before you consider doing anything new or different. But you're definitely right, is that the Facebook and even Instagram, the age of people engaging with it is rising. It's not for young people. And I say this as an Instagram user, and then really embarrassingly showed my friend's Instagram to a colleague that was 20, and she looked at it and she said, wow, millennials post on Instagram, so weird. And that was a really shameful experience to me. So yeah, it's definitely generational. So identify your audience before you actually decide where you're going to put your energy.
Thanks, Rosie.
Well, we might leave it there so that we're running pretty close to time. Thank you so much to our presenters today. Muzza, it's great that you could join us from New Zealand, mate. Thank you so much. And to Rosie, we're very lucky to have Rosie as part of the National Landcare Network, and she's there to support us in our Landcare journeys as well, as much as possible. I believe that NLN have developed some PDFs around Rosie's presentation, which are going to be available to everybody. So I'll make sure that they go out to everyone after this presentation, as well as a copy of the recording, so you can stop and start where you want to pick things up from. If anyone has any comments or questions about anything that's been discussed today, please get in contact with me at mdm@landcarewa.org.au. I just want to give our little annual gathering and AGM on Friday, the 8th of December, a little plug at the Wetlands Centre in Coburn. And that'll also be followed by our 40 Years of Landcare Hall of Fame Sundowner. So we would love for all of our members to meet us there. There's details on our social media and website and LinkedIn. Thank you so much to everybody. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your week, and I hope to see your smiling faces again very soon. Thank you so much.
Stacey, thanks
Bye,
everyone. Nice to see you.
We just hang around for a minute, team.
Are we? Yep.
Just to really say, Muzza, that was fabulous, you know, and the way that it wove in, it was a really good pick of cases to have Rosie there, then to unpack in that technical sense, you know, how your story came along. And I think it's going to be a game changer if we can keep this moving, because Landcarers like yourself are natural people, they're humble people, they're not horn tooters.